Hello everyone, welcome to the Departamento Loratorum. My name is Max, and today I'd like to talk to you about the Star Phantoms. You all voted, so in this video we're going to be taking a look at the history and lore of a chapter that took Only in Death Does Duty End a little too seriously, the Star Phantoms. There's a lot to cover, so without any further ado, let's get started with a look at possibly the grimmest, darkest Space Marine chapter in all of 40k. Some chapters of the Adeptus Astartes are known throughout the galaxy, their names shouted by millions of adoring Imperial citizens, and recorded in thousands of hymns and history books. Monuments are raised in their honor on hundreds of worlds, and their heraldry is recognized across the Imperium. The Star Phantoms are not one of these chapters. A secretive and isolationist group, they have experienced both great victories and tragedies over the millennia. But their macabre nature and clashes with other Imperial forces and fellow Astartes chapters have given them a dark reputation. For most of their existence, they operated on the fringes of the Imperium, fighting the Emperor's foes with grim efficiency, but little acclaim. All of that changed in the latter years of M41, when they took part in one of the most famous campaigns in Imperial history, the Badab War. But before we get into that, we need to take a look at the chapter's history and culture, to see how they were shaped into the force that ended the Tyrant of Badab's reign. According to Imperial records, the Star Phantoms were created in the 23rd, or Sentinel founding, sometime in early M38. They, like most other chapters in the Sentinel founding, were tasked with shoring up the Imperium's defenses on the borders of the galaxy. The Star Phantoms were deployed to the Sakara sector, an area plagued by Xenos horrors that had long ravaged the region. Basing themselves on the shrine world of Hakaneth, and drawing their recruits from the nearby worlds whose populations had regressed in feral barbarism, the chapter was tasked with reclaiming the sector from the darkness that had consumed it. They steadfastly upheld this duty for millennia, often operating on their own far from Imperial supply lines and allied forces. This was until the year 102 M40, when the fractious Orc freebooter clans from the Edge Void region seemingly set aside their differences and banded together in an assault on Hakaneth. The entire chapter was recalled to fight off the Orc menace, who threw themselves at the planet in a desperate frenzy. Over the course of 60 days, the Star Phantoms managed to destroy the Orc horde in a running orbital battle. Defensive minefields were destroyed, men were lost in brutal boarding actions, and the chapter's munition stores were almost exhausted, but the Greenskins were utterly destroyed, prevented from even making landfall. However, as the Hakaneth system became clogged with the wreckage of Orc rocks and kill cruises, another threat chose this moment to reveal itself. A temporal warp rift surged into the system, cutting it off from the rest of the galaxy, and at its head was a massive HUD migration. The Xenos had been caught up in the rift, and the fear of the temporal anomalies would have driven the freebooters to run headlong into the Star Phantom's guns. The Astartes initially stood firm, determined to defend their home despite the odds. But as the rift caused reality itself to break down throughout the system, it became clear that this was a lost cause. The chapter fleet was damaged and scattered, and HUD xenoforms began to materialize on Hakaneth's surface in great numbers, their very presence distorting time and space. As the planet's mausoleums crumbled to dust and Battle Brothers were swallowed up by rents in the fabric of reality, it became clear that the chapter had no choice but to flee or face oblivion. Chapter Master Omadon Tiresias ordered his remaining brothers to gather as many relics as they could and head for their surviving ships. It is rumored, however, that not all of the Star Phantoms fled, some choosing to disobey orders and die fighting on their doomed homeworld. Led by their last surviving battle barge, the Memento Mori, the remains of the Star Phantom's fleet made to escape as Hakaneth shattered behind them in the storm. Many vessels were destroyed during the flight through the Rift Vortex, and Tiresias himself was blinded when a stray time eddy struck the Memento Mori's command deck. Emerging from the rift in the battered remains of their fleet, the Star Phantoms found themselves crippled. Their home was gone, and only a third of their original strength now remained. But despite their losses, the fact that they had managed to survive at all was an impressive feat, as few other chapters had ever faced a full-scale HUD migration and lived to tell the tale. The Star Phantoms set about slowly rebuilding their numbers, becoming a wandering fleet-based chapter operating mostly throughout the Segmentum Obscurus, often far from the support of other Imperial forces, until the end of the Badab War. This relative isolation and hardship caused the chapter to develop a unique culture. The Star Phantoms are fiercely independent and reserved, and when they do interact with outsiders, they often come off as cold and taciturn. But most notably, the Battle Brothers of the chapter are seen to exhibit a strange fixation on death and mortality, to an even greater degree than can be found in most other Space Marine chapter cults. The Star Phantoms' rites and traditions, known as their Mortuary cult, have a heavy focus on death and martyrdom. The living are given little respect or consideration, but the dead, especially those who fell in Imperial service, are honored and held in great reverence. The Emperor himself is considered to be a divine figure by the chapter, and they view him as the Imperator Mortifex, the judge of the dead and keeper of martyrs. Symbols of death, elaborate funerary customs, and relics made from the bones of the deceased are common sights throughout the chapter. Many brothers maintain personal reliquaries filled with items made from the remains of their fallen comrades, and coat their armor in bone dust, harvested from their defeated foes. They also incorporate many morbid symbols into their armor and vehicles, and their hourglass and skull heraldry itself serves as a pointed reminder of the inevitability of death. The Star Phantom's chaplains are responsible for keeping and maintaining these beliefs, preaching to the Astartes under their care that they are divinely ordained killers, responsible for bringing death to any who defy the Emperor's will. The Battle Brothers of the chapter carry out these duties with grim solemnity, and without any regard for their own lives, truly embracing their role as the Emperor's angels of death. This disdain for the living carries over to the battlefield, as the Star Phantoms are infamous for their indiscriminate destruction and lack of regard for collateral damage. The chapter is known to commonly use heavy and exotic weaponry, and they love to bring down their foes with overwhelming firepower. All of this, combined with their aforementioned morbid nature, can make it awkward for other Imperial forces to fight alongside them, to put it mildly. Unlike many other Astartes chapters, the Star Phantoms don't view any one style of combat as inherently more noble than the others, believing that bringing death to their foes is the only thing that matters. As a general rule, though, the Star Phantoms do prefer to obliterate their foes from range, often with large numbers of plasma or melta weapons, and only enter into close combat when it becomes tactically expedient. Their history as a fleet-based chapter has also caused them to specialize in ship combat and near-orbit insertions, with first strike and mass drop-pod assaults being favored tactics among their commanders. In spite of their somewhat divergent beliefs, the Star Phantoms operate as a mostly Codex-compliant chapter, with a few discrepancies. For example, they maintain 4 Reclusiarchs and a Master of Sanctity in their chaplaincy, to see to the specific needs of their chapter cult. Their large armory, and preferences for Space Marine portable heavy weaponry, also leads the chapter to include 3 Devastator or Fire Support squads in a standard battle company, instead of the normal 2. This love of firepower is exemplified by the chapter's officers, as many wield combi weapons, especially combi plasma and melta guns, as symbols of leadership. Given their fondness for drop pod assaults and first strikes, the Star Phantoms are also known to maintain a sizable core of Deathstorm drop pods, Land Raiders, and Vindicators, in order to carry them into battle to dispense the Emperor's will. Like all other chapters, the Star Phantoms frequently send Battle Brothers to serve in the Deathwatch, honoring ancient oaths and learning the most efficient ways to kill Xenos. According to the Deathwatch RPG supplement Honor the Chapter, some candidates may be tasked by their superiors with learning exactly how previous brothers serving their long watch met their end, creating a death saga to bring back to the rest of the chapter. As you'd expect, Star Phantom's kill team members often keep their distance from their new brothers, shunning any close contact, but they will happily lay down their lives for them, viewing a meaningful, properly mourned death as the highest honor a Space Marine can aspire to. This is perhaps best exemplified by Brother Mercer, who gave his life defending Watch Station Midiel in the Jericho Reach from Chaos forces. In a tale recorded in the Emperor's Chosen Deathwatch RPG supplement, he is said to have defended the main gate for 6 hours, slaying 24 traitor Marines with his bare hands and teeth after his ammunition ran dry. He was eventually slain by a demon spawn, summoned by foul sorcery, protecting the gate and his brothers to the end. In honor of his sacrifice, the Star Phantom sent a detachment of serfs to watch Fortress Iriok, tasked with singing the hours in a chapel dedicated to Brother Mercer to ensure his memory lives on forever. These serfs are said to be honor-bound to never cease their chanting, even in the most dire circumstances. Despite Imperial records stating that the Star Phantoms were only created in M38, the chapter has been spotted as far back as the aftermath of the Horus Heresy, requesting the aid of the Flesh Terrors for a crusade in the Saqqara sector, as seen in the novel Flesh of Cretaceous. And, while the origin of the chapter's gene seed is officially unknown, this, combined with some of their livery, such as their skull-faced hourglass chapter symbol, and generally dour demeanor, has led some observers to speculate that the chapter was made from Dark Angel's gene stock. Specifically, it is rumored that the Star Phantoms are descended from the 1st Legion unit known as the Dreadwing. Part of the Hexagrammaton, the 6 specialist formations of the Dark Angel's Legion, the Dreadwing were perhaps the most feared out of all of these wings. They focused on the utter annihilation of their foes, utilizing exotic or forbidden weaponry to carry out their purges and exterminatus actions, which does sound quite similar to the Star Phantom's combat doctrine. It is unknown what happened to the Dreadwing after the Second Founding, although it appears possible that they could have formed the core of a new Star Phantoms chapter. This would contradict the established Imperial records, but given how often those same records are shown to be horribly biased, manipulated, or just outright wrong, it is not an impossibility. It could be that, as the Star Phantoms often operate alone and on the fringes, they went unrecorded for several millennia, or that any records of their existence were destroyed, either accidentally or deliberately in that time. It's also possible that there was a second founding Star Phantoms chapter, but at some point they were destroyed and then later refounded. Or that they simply are a chapter of the 23rd founding, who made use of a by that point ancient Legion symbol as their heraldry. Whatever the truth may be, the modern Star Phantoms take offense to any speculation on their origin and potential connections to the First Legion. The Dark Angels, for their part, deny that there is any relation between them and the morbid Star Phantoms. And, to be fair, the Star Phantoms do not appear to possess any of the structures typically associated with the Dark Angels or their recognized successors, the Unforgiven. No records exist of them ever fielding equivalents to the Dark Angels' Deathwing or Ravenwing companies, and they have never been seen or even rumored to have taken part in the hunt for the Fallen. This could be the result of a deliberate rift or difference of opinion between the two chapters, which causes bad blood between them even to this day. It may also be that the Star Phantoms lost the knowledge of, or were never informed of, their origins. or that these rumors are nothing more than baseless speculation, and that the Star Phantoms resent any inquiries into their past simply due to their pride and reticent nature. Regardless of their origins, the Star Phantoms have loyally served the Emperor of Mankind for millennia. Despite their isolationism, the chapter has been recorded as taking part in several notable campaigns, although their actions in these theaters led to them developing quite the reputation by the time of the Badab War. In 718 M39, the chapter came to the aid of a fortress world on the edge of the Saqqara sector known as Kormarg II. For over 200 years, the planet had been besieged by a Xenos race known as the Crave. The defenders had sent many requests for aid, but they had long been ignored. That was until the Star Phantoms, finally deciding to answer Kormarg's distress call, arrived in force. Their vessels surrounded and destroyed the orbiting Crave nest webs, and the Xenos already on the planet's surface were crushed between the hammer of an Astartes drop pod assault and the anvil of the Kormarg Bastion network. With their foes defeated and their world finally free, the defenders flung open their gates and came out to greet their rescuers. But when the Star Phantoms saw the people of Kormarg, it quickly became apparent that the defenders had become physically and spiritually corrupted during their centuries-long battle with the Xenos. Pronouncing judgment on the world, the Star Phantom's chapter master led his brothers in a purge of the entire population. Bastions that had withstood 200 years of Xenos assaults fell quickly, having opened themselves up to their would-be saviors. Shell craters were used as mass graves, with bodies piled up and burned as the chapter's chantry servitors sang hymns to honor their martyrdom. After the Star Phantoms finished their work, the planet was recolonized and turned into a Departmento Munitorum penal world. Later on, in early M41, the Star Phantoms were one of the Space Marine chapters that joined in the Macarian Crusade. Led by the famous Lord Solar Macarius, in the course of just 7 years, he and his 7 army groups swept across the Segmentum Pacificus, bringing thousands of worlds back into the Imperial fold, and even marching to the Halo Zone on the very edge of the galaxy. While the Star Phantoms took part in some of the Crusade's deadliest engagements, their high rate of collateral damage and arguments over strategy and deployment did not improve their standing in the eyes of the Imperium. Macarius himself was even quoted as saying that the chapter was unsuitable for tactical close support of other Imperial units. But the greatest damage to their reputation was yet to come. After the sudden death of the Lord Solar, his newly won domain quickly fell to pieces. The 7 generals in charge of his army groups, believing that the spoils of war should go to the strongest, and driven by greed and their own personal rivalries, quickly fell into infighting. The Star Phantoms took part in the conflict that was later known as the Macarian Heresy, clashing with forces that they believe had betrayed the Imperium. According to suppressed sources, they completely wiped out the 17th Terrax Guard Regiment on Toth, and clashed with their former allies in the Marines' Malevolent chapter, almost driving them to extinction. Alarmed by their actions, the Inquisition's Ordo Hereticus launched an investigation into the chapter. Although they were cleared of heresy, the Star Phantoms did receive a formal censure. This resulted in them being forced to act as the spearhead for the Imperium's response to the Macarian heresy, joining over 100 other chapters in putting down the uprising. After this thankless and dangerous task was completed, the wounded chapter elected to launch a crusade through the Segmentum Tempestus, recovering their strength while assaulting the Orc and Chaos strongholds that filled the region. After this, they pass out of recorded Imperial history, until their arrival in the Badab sector in the year 912 M41. Summoned by Legate Inquisitor Frayne, the leading Imperial representative during the Badab War, the Star Phantoms arrived at the region in full chapter strength, greatly bolstering the diminished Imperial forces. How Frayne was able to requisition their aid is unknown. They may have been serving under the Inquisition prior to their arrival, or it could be that there was an old rivalry between them and the Astral Claws that the Legate exploited to secure their support. It has also been speculated that, as an outsider chapter with few ties to the region, the Star Phantoms would be more willing to do whatever it took to effect the total destruction of the secessionists. Whatever the case, the chapter arrived at the tail end of the war. The secessionists were all but defeated, with the Executioners, Lamenters, and Mantis warriors already having surrendered to Imperial authority. Only Luft-Huron's Astral Claws remained, holding out in the heavily fortified Badab system, and, with the arrival of the Star Phantoms, the Loyalists finally had the strength to assault the enemy's home. The Imperial Armada arrived at Badab in the year 913 M41, attacking the system's space defense globe known as the Ring of Steel. The Star Phantom's flagship, the battle barge Memento Mori, led a wing of strike cruisers into the Starfort network alongside the Red Scorpion's battle barge, the Sword of Ordon. These forts were captured one after another in brutal boarding actions, until the Sons of Medusa and Exorcist managed to take the main control station of Sentinel Sigma, claiming the Ring of Steel for the Loyalists. Now only Badab Primaris remained, but taking it would be no easy task, as the planet had been heavily fortified, its guns more than capable of countering a conventional orbital assault. The original plan was for the Firehawk Star Fortress, the Raptorus Rex, to provide cover for the Loyalist drop pods, but it had been damaged in the assault on the Ring of Steel and could no longer perform that duty. The Star Phantoms, having requested the honor of leading the assault, volunteered to use the Memento Mori to screen for fire, trusting their venerable vessel to survive against the guns of Badab. 9 of their companies would be part of the offensive, along with the chapter's other battle barge, the Pale Wraith, 7 strike cruisers, and 25 escort vessels. 2 companies would assault the High Guard orbital station, alongside the Firehawks and Sons of Medusa, but the remaining 7, along with 17 attached dreadnoughts, would be tasked with taking the Palace of Thorns and defeating the Tyrant himself. This larger contingent was led by the famed captain of the Star Phantom's 9th Company, Zrukal Androcles. Known as Siegebreaker due to his actions in the counter-invasion of Murtar Prime, the captain had risen high in the chapter thanks to his skills as a Devastator sergeant. During the Galaxan Secession Wars, he and his squad destroyed a remarkable 58 traitor tanks in a single day, and in the Battle of Orsaga, he led a ragtag force to breach and capture a traitor Leviathan, turning the tide of the battle. He was the perfect man to entrust with the duty of finally ending the Badab War. When the assault on Badab Primaris began, the Memento Mori drove directly into oncoming fire, allowing dozens of other vessels to unleash their Astartes cargo on the traitors below. Drop pods, assault rams, and thunderhawks fell like rain, as point defense guns roared like thunder in response. The Star Phantom's main force suffered heavily, with only 500 Astartes making landfall outside of the palace. Despite this, they moved in, besieging the former heart of the Tyrant's empire. The fighting was fierce, as the Palace of Thorns had become a maze of traps, dead ends, and ambushes. The Astral Claws fought like mad, holding the Citadel for a full night, even after the arrival of Loyalist reinforcements and the Titans of the Legio Crucius. But on the second day of the assault, thanks to the destruction of the Hive's reactors by the Carcharodons chapter, Badab Primaris began to rip itself apart, and the Loyalists were given an opening. A Star Phantom strike force, consisting of assault-equipped Marines and Terminators under Captain Androcles, managed to use this disruption in the palace's defenses to breach into its catacombs. Fighting through the most fanatical Astral Claws defenders, Androcles and his men managed to reach Luft Huron himself. The Tyrant and his personal guard had been attempting to flee the now doomed planet in a hidden ship, and came across the Star Phantoms in one of the palace's deep sublevels. The two sides met in brutal combat, each refusing to give quarter. Not one of the Star Phantoms survived to tell of what transpired, but thanks to their armor recordings we know what occurred in this final battle of the Badab War. After a desperate close-quarters struggle, the Tyrant of Badab and his men cut down the Star Phantoms, with Huron himself dealing the final blow to Captain Androcles. But even as he fell, the Siegebreaker managed to fire his combi melt to enter the Tyrant at point-blank range. The blast struck Huron's archaic lightning claw, causing it to explode, destroying his right arm and much of his body in the process. For anyone else this would have been a fatal wound, but not for Luft Huron. His master of the forge, Armenmius Volthex, managed to escape with 200 other Astral Claw survivors, carrying their barely living lord with them into the warp storm known as the Maelstrom. There, through a combination of technical wizardry and the will of the Chaos Gods, Luft Huron was reborn as Huron Blackheart, leader of the piratical Red Corsairs. As for the Star Phantoms, they had suffered heavy losses in the final assault on Badab, and were down to a third of their original strength. But, in honor of their efforts in ending the secessionist threat, the chapter was granted dominion over the now ravaged Badab sector by Legate Inquisitor Frayne, and tasked with policing the surviving population. Viewing this as a just reward for all of their efforts, the chapter took the ice moon of Jaga in the Archaea system, one of the few planets not impacted by the Decade of War, as their new home. The heavily damaged Memento Mori was laid to rest on its surface, becoming the core of a new fortress monastery where the chapter could rebuild and guard their new domain. Even though they are still recovering in the aftermath of the Badab War, the Star Phantoms refused to neglect their duties. The nearby Carthago sector had suffered while fighting the secessionists, losing much of its armed forces in the process. Taking advantage of this, orcs swarmed into the region, claiming several worlds and sparking a bloody, century-long imperial response known as the Carthago Crusade. Diminished as they were, the Star Phantoms were only able to send their 5th Company under Captain Calfax to join in the war, fighting alongside an entire Black Templar Crusade force and 3 companies from the Libators chapter. The 5th Company's actions gained them much glory, but they were unfortunately forced to withdraw and resupply in 926 M41 before they could take part in the famed Calibrim landings. They intended to rejoin the main force shortly, but unforeseen events kept them fully occupied. Heading to the agri-world of Karak, the Star Phantoms arrived in-system in their strike cruiser, the Fires of Salvation, only to find the planet in open revolt. Instigated by the Chaos Lord Mahar the Harvester, leader of the Kornite warband known as the Slaughterkin, the traitors had soon found themselves in control of almost the entire planet. Only the garrison of Cadian guardsmen, led by Colonel Mortimer, still held out on Kalnix Island. These brave souls risked everything in a daring attack on Ven Ness spaceport, desperately trying to signal the approaching Star Phantoms and request aid. Surrounded by a horde of charnel cultists, the guardsmen were saved by the arrival of Captain Calfax and his 5th Company, who drove off the traitor forces. Despite his other obligations, Calfax pledged his brothers to the reclamation of Karak, refusing to allow the planet to fall to chaos. While he and his men planned and resupplied, in orbit the Fires of Salvation drew the Slaughterkin vessels away from the planet, preventing them from reinforcing their lord. On the ground, Calfax had determined that the best hope for victory came in the form of a direct assault on the Harvester, who was holed up in the planetary capital of Calder's Ark. Launching an aerial assault, the Star Phantom's Thunderhawks and Storm Eagles were joined by every surviving Imperious soldier and pilot on the planet. A brutal battle ensued in the skies above the city, but the captain and his hand-picked squad managed to cut through it and reach the former governor's palace. There, high atop its towers, they found Mahar. The two sides met in a savage battle, in which the Lord of the Slaughterkin was caught in a crossfire and nearly killed. As punishment for his failure, the fell gods of chaos transformed him into a writhing chaos spawn. Leaving the now harmless Lord behind, the Star Phantoms fought their way free, ordering for every pilot to concentrate their fire on the palace. Soon it was reduced to rubble, the Harvester's twisted form perishing with his rebellion in the resulting inferno. The remaining Chaos cultists fled into the planet's thick forests. It took years for Imperial Guard reinforcements to purge them all, and the interruption in food supplies resulted in famines that claimed the lives of millions, but victory was achieved. The Star Phantoms eventually returned to the Carthago Crusade, just in time for its disastrous conclusion. The chapter has unfortunately not managed to make its mark on Imperial history since, and appears to have once again receded into the shadows. But when the Emperor calls them to deal death in his name once more, you can be sure that the Star Phantoms will be ready. Appearing in the original Badab War article written by Rick Priestley in White Dwarf 101 back in 1988, the Star Phantoms are one of the oldest chapters in all of Warhammer 40k. In this article, they are described as besieging Badab and later gaining the homeworld of the Executioners as a reward, which we can see elements of in later lore. They didn't manage to get one of the famous Gary Chalk illustrations though, which is a shame. Their next appearance was in the 2006 Cities of Death book by Andy Hoare, which describes their actions in taking the Palace of Thorns for the first time, another element that was incorporated into later Badab lore. But the chapter's biggest outing to date was in the Imperial Armor Badab War books, written by Alan Bly and released from 2010 to 2011. This is where we get most of the information on their history and culture, alongside the Deathwatch RPG books that I mentioned previously, turning them from just a name on a page to the interesting and unique chapter that we have today. The Star Phantoms also appeared in 2012's Imperial Armor Aeronautica by Neil Wiley, and 2014's Imperial Armor Volume 13 by Andy Hoare, Alan Bly, and Neil Wiley, both of which gave us the information on their role in the Scourging of Karak. They also showed up in the short story The Trial of the Mantis Warriors by C.S. Godot. There, it is again said that they besieged Badab, but it's also added that during and before this they had clashed with the Mantis Warriors, even losing one of their strike cruisers to a suicide assault by the Mantis Religiosa units. They were then joined by the Mantis Warriors' second company in breaking through Badab's orbital defenses, once they realized that Huron had fallen to chaos. The story is contradicted by the Imperial Armor books, which state that the Mantis Warriors had surrendered before the Star Phantoms even arrived to the Badab War, but I wanted to include it here for completeness. They haven't appeared in any post-8th edition lore that I know of, aside from a mention of Captain Androcles in Mike Brooks' Huron Blackheart novel, and that is a shame. The Star Phantoms are a great chapter. I find their culture and the fact that they're some of the few Space Marines to view the Emperor as a god really interesting, and, well, I'm more of a melee guy myself, I can't deny that there is something really cool about a Space Marine with a massive gun blowing shit up. They'll always be sure to get the job done, and you've got to respect that. I'd really like to see them show up sometime soon. I bet they would just love Hell Blasters. Plus, their color scheme is just so good, black and white is just such a great combo, and it's really a shame that we haven't gotten more of that. If you enjoyed this video, please consider becoming a patron or channel member. You can join awesome members like Wolfrey, Grubus, Error404, and Neil Sullivan, and get access to some cool perks like members-only polls and early access to videos. Let me know in the comments if there are any other chapters you'd like to see me cover, and please don't forget to like and subscribe, it really helps the channel and the YouTube algorithm. For now, thank you and have a great day. Bye!